Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Local Review Body, 14th of October 2024. As always, I'll start with some introductions. First of all, I am Councillor Bob Braun. I'm the convener of the Local Review Body. And to my right, I have Councillor Grant Stewart. To my left, Councillor Ken Harvey. We are, by requirement, all members of the Planning and Placemaking Committee. To my far right is Mrs. Leslie Tierney. She is the Independent Planning Advisor, and she's had no involvement with any of these cases until they came forward for appeal. To my left, beyond Councillor Harvey, is Mr. Jeff Falk, who is our legal advisor for today, and beyond him on the left is Mr. Danny Williams from Democratic Governance Services. So my first question, gentlemen, is to ask, are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Harvey.
No declarations of interest.
And Councillor Stewart?
No declarations.
Fine. I, on this occasion, do have a declaration of non-financial interest in item 4.4 today. And on that basis, I will recuse myself from the application, and I believe Bailey McLaren will be stepping in for me in a moment. Bear with me for a minute to take my place to make up the numbers. Before we go that far, gentlemen, we have to agree the minutes of the last meeting. As I was the only person on the committee at that time, I'm happy with the minutes as they are, so they are agreed. Now, for the purposes of this meeting this afternoon, and given that I have to step out and rather than have Bailey McLaren waiting all the way through, do I have your agreement that we can move item 4.4 as it is at the moment to become the first application this afternoon? Okay, fine. So if I may, I'll ask Bailey McLaren if she'll come forward, and I will recuse myself, and hopefully you'll remember to call me back in at the due time.
Sorry, members. Obviously, with the convener now having excused himself from the meeting for the time being, we'll need to appoint an acting convener. Do we have any nominations for that?
I'll nominate Grant Stewart to be convener.
I'll second that.
I'm happy to accept being acting convener.
Okay, thank you very much, members. So, Councillor Stewart, I'll pass over to yourself now for this item.
Thank you. We're going to move to item 4.4 in our agenda, and this is the LRB 2024/39. It's a review of condition 1 on application 24/00600/FLL. Application to delete condition 1, fence and hedging of permission. 23/02007/FLL, 1 Commanders Grove, Braco. Can I introduce Ms. Tierney to submit your findings on the application for review? Thank you.
Thank you, convener. We'll run through some slides to start with before moving on to some details of the case. Just the aerial shot here of Braco, and the application review site is denoted with the yellow star there. It's just beside the A822, the first housing development on the left-hand side as you enter Braco from the south. Next slide, please. And then the drawing site plan that came with the planning application. So as you can see, the main road up through the middle there, Commanders Grove into the left with the dwelling houses in that development, and number 1 at the corner on the left-hand side as you come into the development. Next slide, please. And then running through some photographs. This is the view to the south from just outside the application site. So you can start to see the fence in question here on the right-hand side and the end of the footway as you leave the settlement from the 30-mile-an-hour limit to the 60-mile-an-hour limit. Next slide, please. The photo on the left there is just the fence that runs along the bottom edge of the garden, the southern end of the garden, from the footway to the existing boundary wall and fence with the property. And then, as you can see, the 1 metre fence running along the side of the footway in a northerly direction to the junction with the housing development and the area of gardening behind the 1 metre fence there. Next slide, please. And then looking more closely as you move along the pavement, again, you can see the fence that runs around the perimeter of the site, which is in the ownership of the applicant, between the footway and, as I say, the existing boundary treatment that would have been what was granted as part of the approval of the original development. And as you can see, the area has been laid out with some stones and shrubs. Next slide, please. And then the photo on the left is at the entrance to the development. So we're now looking south again, just as you come into the development. And then the photo on the right is the same direction, but from the opposite side of the road at the entrance into the housing development. Next slide, please. Another couple of photographs which just show the garden area, the existing dwelling house, the boundary treatment of the original approval, which would be the small wall and fence that runs close to the dwelling house, and then this extended area of garden and the fencing. And the one on the right is the front of the dwelling house once you've entered the development, with that kind of open area of front garden lawn. Next slide, please. And then this is standing at the application review property, looking to the other side of the entrance into the development. As you can see, it's an open area of grass between the footway and the boundary with that dwelling house and its existing boundary wall. Next slide, please. There's a couple of photographs here that were submitted by the applicant. So this shows the fence from the inside and some of the planting that they've carried out, including some of these climbing plants on the inside of the fence. Next slide, please. And then this was also submitted by the applicant, very similar to the one that I showed you earlier that I had taken. Next slide, please. And then a close-up of the fence, just so you can see it in a little bit more detail in terms of its construction and style. Next slide, please. This is another fence which is referred to in the paperwork submitted by the applicant. There is reference to other fences within the village that run along roadsides and so on. Obviously, this one's much taller in height. Next slide. I think that's the last one. So in terms of the introduction and the background to the appeal, as you've seen there, Commander's Grove is a modern residential development at the southern entrance to Braco. Number 1 is located to the south side of the entrance into the development from the 8822 road. A previous application for a 1.8 metre high vertical timber fence around the landscaped area at the entrance between the road and the delineated private garden of number 1 was refused and then dismissed on appeal by the local review body. A 1 metre high fence was subsequently built and the application was required because the fence facilitated the change of use of the public area of landscaped area to private garden. Rather than refuse permission, a pragmatic approach was taken by the Planning Service to approve the change of use, subject to the fence being removed because its design and extent was deemed unacceptable on such a prominent corner site. the fence posts being reused for a post and wire fence, and a 1 metre tall beech hedge being planted to a restricted height to ensure satisfactory visibility displays are maintained. This is the condition which has been appealed under section 42. The applicant now seeks to delete condition 1, which requires the reformation of the fence and the planting of a beech hedge, because it would be very difficult to maintain the hedge at a height of 1 metre, whereas the fence retains a constant height. It's not clear why it's the case, but the area of ground in question is owned by the applicant. They wish to retain the fence to stop dogfiling on their ground. Both properties at the entrance to Commander's Grove were purposely designed set back from the main road, providing the required visibility displays for vehicles leaving the development and providing an attractive, symmetrically balanced entrance feature. The landscaped entrance feature at number 2 retains its pleasant appearance with native hedging and grass, whereas the feature at number 1 has had a gravelled surface for a number of years. So in terms of the planning services assessment, in terms of design, layout, landscape and visual amenity, although the fence is low-lying, it has a stark visual impact as it brings built development hard up to the public footpath, which is uncharacteristic of the Commander's Grove development. It also results in a layering effect, since there's already a 1.8 metre tall fence and wall set back from the road, presumably in line with the original approval for the housing development, and enclosing the original area of private garden. The visual impact is also compounded by the loss of the visual setback and the loss of symmetry in the entrance feature to the development. It is accepted that while the applicant has presumably gravelled over the green area at the entrance, it still has a visual amenity value, being an integral part of the development, as a feature and a buffer to the public road. As noted in the previous approval, the change of use of the land is not of concern per se, providing that it is enclosed by an appropriate specification of soft landscaping, rather than any type of built development, and no development were to be located within the extended garden ground, then it would still provide an attractive entrance feature. Accordingly, rather than refuse permission for the change of use of the land, it was found the best approach would be to approve it subject to the vertical fence boards being removed, the fence posts being reused for a post and wire fence, along with hedging. This, along with the removal of permitted development rights, was to be secured by condition. It was stated that only on the basis of the implementation of these conditions is the development considered acceptable. The fence, by virtue of its inappropriate design, position and extent, has an adverse effect on the character and visual amenity of the area. Accordingly, approval would be contrary to policies 1A, 1B, A, B, C and D, 17C and 39, which seek to ensure that development contributes positively to the surrounding built environment in order to respect the character and amenity of the place and ensure that it does not erode local distinctiveness or the visual and landscape quality of the area. Finally, it's accepted that the maintenance of a hedge to a specific height of 1 metre is overly onerous, as it would require almost daily maintenance. However, a rewording of the condition would allow for the hedge to be maintained up to a maximum height, which would allow for its maintenance on a much less frequent basis, while still providing an element of containment and securing adequate visibility. In terms of roads and access, no transportation issues have been raised. In terms of visibility impacts at the junction, however, the street name road sign will require to be relocated. In terms of the applicant's case, they've stated that this is not an area that can be used for recreational purposes due to the proximity of the road and subsequent noise. It is solely to be used for planting shrubs to create something nice to look at when walking or driving by. There are 3 approaches to Braco. Here, one with a wall enclosing their garden, and the other one has a new fence at least 1.8 metres high atop of an embankment. All of the houses up to the centre of Braco, except for 2, have high fences in excess of 1 metre, so this does not look out of place. Climbing shrubs have been planted on the inside of the fence so that these will grow up safely and through the fence and create colour. This area is the first and last part of Braco that is seen by visitors on this approach, and it's important that a good impression is made. The design and height of the fence allows for the area to be seen by the public either through the gaps in the boards or over the boards due to its low height. Over 250 boards were shaped by hand to create an aesthetically pleasing look to the fence. The fence will neither grow in height nor width, so will always be 1 metre tall. A bare root beech hedge should be planted in the autumn winter and be maintained at a minimum height of 1.2 metres for optimum results. It will be very difficult to maintain a hedge at this height of 1 metre, whilst a fence requires no maintenance. People frequently stop to chat about this area and think it is an improvement. This area was challenging to maintain before the fence was built, given the proximity to the road, and enclosing it with the fence provides security, a degree of privacy when gardening, and prevents littering and dog fouling. A wire fence is unsightly, provides little protection or privacy when maintaining the area, and will not stop the weeds blowing over from the fields. The fence stops buffering from the lorries passing by. There's also some history referred to of various communications with planning and enforcement staff. Residents have given positive feedback on the fence, noting that it enhances the area and is weathering nicely to blend in with the surroundings. The fence and associated planting enhance the aesthetic and environmental value of their property and the wider community. They're willing to explore planting climbers on the outside of the fence or painting it, even though they consider that the natural wood blends in better with the surroundings. And finally, just to note, there are also 2 letters of support on the application.
Thank you, Ms Tierney. Do members have any questions for Ms Tierney on her presentation? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Vice Convener, Acting Convener. Just to kind of clarify the comments about the hedge. So you said a hedge of 1 metre is, in the planning department's opinion, not easy to maintain, but 1.2 is easy to maintain. Was that correct?
I think what the planning department have recognised in discussions with the applicant is that no matter what, the hedge can't be more than 1.05 metres high. And that's it. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Bailey McLaren.
Thank you. I actually have a question for Mr. Fogg, if that's okay, Acting Convener. You know, are we in danger of setting a sort of precedence here, as we have many areas throughout Perth and Kinross that have such sort of design opening into developments or surrounding more modern housing developments of what has been seen to be as a conscious design to have that green space there that's accessible.
You're correct, Bailey McLaren, that there are other examples across Perth and Kinross of areas of open space leading into residential development, and that's part of the design and how it was planned to be, not just at Braco, but arguably even in North Muirton and Potter Hill, but across. So it's not unique. The consequence of an application forming a precedent is a legitimate planning consideration to which you can have regard. I would say against that, you've got this slightly competing direction that each should be considered on its own merits. I would say that I think greater concern should be applied and focus should be applied on the area around Commander Grove and the potential consequences or ramifications of this being approved for the setting of this area of Braco, rather than what it might mean for Kinross, Pitlochry, Aberfeldy. I think the further away you go, one would expect much less weight to be attached to that. But I think certainly in terms of the immediate locale and vicinity of this application site, it's a proper consideration for the LRB to expect it to weigh up in the balance along with other considerations.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Acting Convener. I think it's probably for Leslie. There was a comment made about an 8-foot fence at another location entering Braco. I think it was the Braco, sorry, that was put me off my train of thought there. That there was mentions in support of the application. Is there any more detail as to the differences there, perhaps?
I'm afraid not, Councillor. Obviously, there's reference within the paper submitted by the appellant of other examples, indeed precedent. So, you know, you could look into each individual case and determine what the reasoning was behind them. They may have been granted permission. They may be unauthorised. So.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Tierney, on my site visit yesterday, I went into the development and I could see no other properties with fencing around. I didn't go quite deep into the development area. Is it my understanding that there was no other sort of picket type fencing in that development?
Councillor, the same. Obviously, I've had a look at the wider development when I've been there. I think you're correct. There doesn't appear to be any other fences anywhere in the development, either around the boundaries or certainly in the front gardens that you can see from the public road. They're all very open and just kind of laid out to grass and gardens. I think that the permission itself is obviously a very historical permission. It's possibly 1980s or so. If you went back into records, you could probably find the original permission and look at, you know, what was specifically mentioned in terms of fencing and landscaping. But it does appear that there's no other fencing there, and perhaps the one condition there probably would have been a removal of permitted development rights, such that applications for fences and so on would have been required.
Thank you. And if I may sort of follow on, we are dealing with further into the village, we're dealing with sort of a kind of traditional linear sort of 17th, 18th century type village. And further up, we've got Greenhoch Way, which is set back from the main road. And again, they've got a sort of a visibility type display. And again, I think it's probably a similar age of development that you just mentioned. Is this obviously, is that to sort of put these modern developments further back to soften the sort of the impact of modern developments in a kind of traditional Scottish linear village?
Yes, I think so. Convener, I think with any housing development, you know, even 30, 40 years ago, there would have been you know, a lot of thought put into the visual impact of the development, especially in this location as you kind of enter the village from the south, and if it's of a particular historic character and so on. Absolutely not unusual for there to be this kind of setback that just provides a pleasant entrance to the development, apart from anything else, I would say.
Thank you. Is there any further questions from members? Members, we have been issued papers and we have heard from Ms. Tierney, and we've had some legal advice from Mr. Fogg. Are members happy to proceed to coming to a decision?
Happy to proceed.
Happy to proceed.
Thank you, members. I'll take the lead here in the first determination. As we've heard, this is we're dealing with planning regulations, and we've got numerous papers, and we've heard from Ms. Tierney this afternoon. My determination is to go with the letter issued on the 12th of June of this year, where the pragmatic approach of putting in a stub and wire fence with a beech hedge would be more in keeping with the development that it sits in and the semi-rural location that Braco sits in. So I am going to go with the decision of the Perth and Kinross officers. Bailey McLaren.
Thank you, Acting Convener. The property already has another fence, security fencing wall. It is in a prominent area, entering the village and on the edge of a conservation area. It is stark. Our planning officers have given a compromise that I also see as appropriate. As Mr. Fogg has said, potential possibly to set a precedent across the road. That really would change the visual design, streetscape. So I too am in agreement with the officers' decisions and go with the decision of the Perth and Kinross Council officers on this occasion. Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey McLaren. Councillor Harvey.
Probably moot now, but I also agree with the general findings there, mainly the visual displays. There's no other similar things in the village that look like that. It is fairly stark, as Bailey McLaren pointed out, and I think the alternative suggested by the planning group is reasonable. So therefore, I would also vote to uphold the resolution.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Mr. Fogg, do you have anything to add?
I've noted that it's a unanimous decision to dismiss the review application for the reasons previously given by the appointed officer. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fogg. The decision of the LRB today is to refuse the fence and the officer's decision to use a stub and wire fence and beachhead stands.
Members, we'll now move on. Thank you to Bailey McLaren for stepping in for me there, and thank you to my colleagues. We'll now move back into the order we have. So our first paper is item 4.1. I'll find my way back in the book. This is the erection of a dwelling house and associated works, land 250 metres southwest of Broomhill House, Station Road, Crooked Devon. Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce that one for us.
Thank you, Convener. Again, we'll just go through some of the slides. So first one here, the aerial photograph of the Crooked Devon village there, and the application review sites just to the south, where the yellow star is located. Next slide, please. And then as we come in a bit closer, you can see the edge of the built-up area of the settlement, kind of a field area, access tracks around that, which is part of the character of the area, and the application site just circled there in yellow. Next slide, please. And then this is the site location plan submitted to planning, which shows the red line site boundary, which is the application site down in the bottom left-hand corner there, and the access that leads all the way from the edge of the village there on Station Road down that track, and there's a passing place shown on the left-hand side there. Next slide, please. Closer image of the red line site boundary, and the image on the right there is effectively just the contours of the site, the boundary of it. The square in the middle indicates the footprint of the building, which the remains of which remain on the site, but which previously existed there. Next slide, please. This is the site plan as proposed. So again, the boundary of the site remains the same, and you can probably just see in the middle of the slide there the red rectangle footprint of the original building that existed on the site, and now we have the footprint of the proposed dwelling house. Some cutting at the back of the site there, and the access into the property and the driveway. Next slide, please. This is the site sections across the site. So from the track, you can see that the ground does slope upwards. It's not a steep slope. It is quite gentle, but you can see the levels there. Next slide, please. And this is the image of the proposed dwelling house. And then these are the photographs of the site. So from the track, this is viewing east. So you can see the existing fencing and planting around the edge of the site. Next slide, please. And then this is looking in the opposite direction, basically from the entrance into the site. Again, you can see the fencing and the hedge around the perimeter of the site. Next slide, please. This is the entrance into the site on the left-hand side. And you can see on the right-hand side, that's still the entrance, but you can see the field on the other side there. Again, you can start to see that the site is enclosed with fencing and hedging. Next slide, please. These are photographs from within the site. So these are the remains of the building that existed on the site. Not clear in any of the papers what the building was or was used for, but it was clearly a reasonable structure. The remnants there of the foundations and bricks around the bottom of the wall, timber walls which have fallen in, and some sheeting which was presumably on the roof of the building. And then this is looking from inside the site back out to the entrance, down to the access track. And then this is now moving back towards Creek of Devon on the left-hand side. So you go along past the site along the track, and then as you come round to the top of the track that leads you back to the village, on the right-hand side, you're now looking back towards the application site in the distance. Next slide, please. And then as you head up the track back to Creek of Devon, again, you can see the site in the distance there. And then this is the road or track that takes you back up to the village on the right-hand side, which is where the passing place is proposed. The ground on that left-hand side of the track, or the track, is in their ownership. Next slide, please. And then some more distant views as you head back up towards the village, looking back towards the site in the distance there across the field. I thought there would have been a couple of arrows there, but you get the impression of the wider landscape. So in terms of the background to the appeal, as you can see, the site is located in the countryside just to the south of Creek of Devon. The area is characterised by wider paddocks and small building groupings. It's accessed by a single track which leads south from Station Road and turns to the west 90 degrees. It is in the ownership of the applicant. The site is contained by the track and by existing fencing and hedging on all sides. It measures around 0.5 hectare. It appears that the hedging was planted around 2016 at the time of a previous planning application, which was withdrawn, and a more recent application for a house was refused. Remains of the building which occupied the site remain on the site, including low brick walls and various wood and metal panelling. The presence of the remains are not evident in the wider landscape, but before the building fell down in around 2014, it would have been visible. The proposal is to erect a traditionally detailed and proportioned 1.5-storey dwelling centrally within the site. So the reasons for refusal were, firstly, the proposal is contrary to Policy 17 Rural Homes of the National Planning Framework 4, as although the site may meet the definition of brownfield, the proposal, due to the isolated and elevated nature of the site, would not comply with the for all proposals criteria noted in point A, as the development would not be suitably sited to be in keeping with the character of the area. Secondly, the proposal is contrary to Policy 9 Brownfield, Vacant and Derelict Land and Empty Buildings of NPF 4, as the site only comprises a small area of brownfield land which doesn't have a wider detrimental landscape impact that would justify the development, as Policy 9A requires it to be sustainable. Thirdly, the proposal is contrary to Policy 19 of the Perth and Kinross LDP2 and the associated Housing in the Countryside supplementary guidance, as it does not meet any of the criteria within categories 1 building groups, 2 infill sites, 3 new houses in the open countryside, 4 renovation or replacement of houses, 5 conversion or replacement of redundant non-domestic buildings, and 6 development on rural brownfield land. In particular, the remains of the building on site do not comply with Category 5, and the presence of the remains means the site cannot be considered under Category 6. And finally, the proposal is contrary to Policy 1A and 1B placemaking of the Perth and Kinross LDP2. The proposed development would not contribute positively to the built and natural environment due to the isolated position of the site in an elevated position, and whilst the site has a hedge boundary, there is a lack of suitable, well-established landscape framework for a wider siting within a paddock. Development would therefore detract from the visual amenity and landscape character of the area. So in terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, it's noted that Policy 17 of NPF 4 promotes the development of rural homes to ensure the needs of communities are met in a sustainable way. Criteria 2 supports the reuse of brownfield land where a return to a natural state has or will not happen without intervention. New homes should be suitably scaled, sited and designed to be in keeping with the character of the area. It is considered that the site is isolated and elevated within a larger paddock of open farmland. It is also evident that the site boundaries are not long established and that the building previously sat within the larger paddock. Whilst attempts have been made to design a house which sits lower in the landscape, the development of the site will have a greater landscape and visual impact than the building remains, which could be easily cleared. Policy 19 of the LDP and the supplementary guidance acknowledges that opportunities do exist for housing in rural areas to support the viability of communities, meet development needs in appropriate locations while safeguarding the character of the countryside, as well as ensuring that a high standard of siting and design is achieved. The policy identifies 6 categories and associated criteria where development will be permitted under Policy 19. Only Category 6 applies in this case related to development on rural brownfield land, where some foundations or substructures remain, providing that buildings above ground level have been removed. Category 6 is not intended to allow the redevelopment of sites like these, nor is it intended to permit redevelopment where sites have simply been allowed to fall into disrepair. It is intended to allow small-scale housing proposals on cleared sites which have been significantly degraded by a former use or activity, and where the redevelopment of the site for housing is the only means by which it is viable to remediate the site. This site is considered to have fallen into disrepair, and no justification is given as to how it had been so significantly degraded that housing is the only viable option. The Contaminated Land Officer notes a condition is required, but this is standard practice for the development of former farm buildings sites and does not indicate anything other than the normal precautionary approach. Many sites which were formerly occupied by buildings have little or no environmental impact and can be left to return to a natural state over time. Even sites where some contamination is present may not require to be remediated if there's no significant risk to human health or the wider environment. While reason for refusal 2 contains reference to MPF 4 Policy 9 on brownfield land, there's little, if any, mention of this in the report of handling. So just to clarify that the glossary for MPF 4 defines brownfield as land which has previously been developed. The term may cover vacant or derelict land, land occupied by redundant or unused buildings, and developed land within the settlement boundary where further intensification of use is considered acceptable. The glossary defines vacant land as previously developed land without physical constraint, which the planning authority has indicated is currently available for redevelopment. MPF 4 Policy 9 states under Part A that development proposals that will result in the sustainable reuse of brownfield land, including vacant and derelict land and buildings, whether permanent or temporary, will be supported. In determining whether the reuse is sustainable, the biodiversity value of brownfield land, which is naturalised, should be taken into account. It does not consider that the development is suitably sited or in keeping with the character of the area. The site is isolated and elevated within a larger paddock of open farmland. It is also evident that the site boundaries are not long established and that the building previously sat within the larger paddock. Whilst attempts have been made to design a house which sits lower in the landscape, the development of the site will have a greater landscape and visual impact than the building remains, which could easily be cleared. The remains are limited very much to the former building footprint, with the remainder of the site being grass. In terms of the applicant's case, in terms of MPF 4 Policy 17.2, by its very definition, the removal of the building will require direct intervention. The site will not return to a natural state without direct intervention. Under MPF 4, a brownfield site includes land which has previously been developed. The term may cover vacant or derelict land. It is also suggested that the brownfield status of the site has been downplayed by the Planning Service in terms of how much of the site is brownfield. The appellant argues that the sustainable reuse of all brownfield land, including vacant and derelict land and buildings, is to be supported, and that the scale of the house proposed is commensurate with the scale of the site. The applicant addresses why the council considers it does not meet category 6 of the supplementary guidance, despite acknowledging it may have been previously been developed. The proposal meets various placemaking policies and reflects the surrounding environment in terms of its orientation, access, boundaries and treatments, and is not at odds with the wider pattern of development in the area south of Crook of Devon. It has good connectivity to Crook of Devon and accords with Policy 15 of MPF 4 on 20-minute neighbourhoods. Policy 15 was not a reason for refusal, meaning that the Planning Service has no issue with the location of the site, which clearly contradicts their view that the site is in an isolated position. Passing places can be provided to the west of the track if it requires, as it's in their ownership. It fits with the wider character of the area. The hedging around the site will further mature and it will improve the visual amenity of the site. And Environmental Health responded that a contaminated land assessment can be subject to a condition. In terms of other matters, there's an objection from Fossaway District Community Council, and there were 12 representations, including objections regarding the development plan, visual amenity and character, including historical character, access, traffic, road safety, noise and pollution, including light pollution, biodiversity and impact on the core path. The letters of support included that the provision of housing in the area is to be welcomed, as is the enhancement to the character of the area, that potential improvements to the access track are a good thing, and that the design is of a good quality. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll open the questions. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Convener. One question, and you didn't mention it, but it's noted in some of the objections about the ownership of both the access lane and the land around it. Seems to be in question. Have you got any further detail on that at all?
So, Councillor, the the applicant has stated that they do own the track and the land. I can check whether there was there's often a red line site boundary with the planning application and a blue land plan which shows the land in their ownership. If you give me a minute or two, I can check that.
If it's not handy, it's okay.
I would suggest from the information that was submitted with the application, it's not clear that they do own the immediately surrounding land, just what's shown within the red line of the planning application, which includes the site and the access from the village.
Therefore, to follow up, does that matter in your opinion?
No.
And Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, convener. We're talking about boundaries a lot in the papers and in your presentation. This proposed development doesn't fit in with the LDP Crook of Devon Drum development boundary. So that's why we're talking about rural housing. And doing a site visit yesterday, you made mention about plantation hedge. That to me looked like a fairly recent boundary planting. Would I be correct in my assumption?
I think, firstly, Councillor, you're correct. It's out with the defined built up area in terms of a settlement boundary, and what we're dealing with here is countryside and the policies and supplementary guidance that cover that, both in terms of the LDP and MPF4. The hedging that exists around the site, within the papers, that it's suggested that that was planted around 2016. So I would argue they're established because they're there. Whether they're well established or not, I would leave it up to you.
Thank you for come back, convener. I think I was being I was trying to establish the buildings look quite what's left of them. It's quite low lying level, but it's red brick. And not being an archaeologist, I wouldn't say, but probably post-war with the sheeting. The boundary hedging looks more recent to what foundations and what rubble's left.
Yes, I would agree with that. I mean, there's not actually much information in any of the papers about the history of the building, when it was built, what it was used for. It appears to have collapsed in 2014. And as I said, the fencing and the hedging, it suggested that that was planted and erected in a couple of years later.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I have a couple of questions. Just going on from Councillor Stewart's question about the surrounding hedging. I mean, we say it's established. Do we have any idea of normally a timescale that we class as established? Or is that very much subjective?
I'm not aware of anything, convener.
Okay, thank you for that. And coming back to obviously a lot of this circles around on the definition of brownfield. And the definitions within MPF4 and LDP2 are slightly different. So just to clarify, I'm right in saying that MPF4 supersedes LDP2 and when there's a conflict of information. And the second part of that is we talk about the brownfield element as a small area within the surrounding area. But am I right in saying that, you know, if we classify an area as brownfield, it's brownfield no matter how much of it within that red line boundary is physically brownfield? Is that right?
So with regard to the first question there about the development plan, obviously your LDP is 2019. MPF4 was adopted in February 2023, and yes, you're correct. It's not that MPF4 supersedes the LDP, but it certainly should be given a greater amount of weight in your decision making. And there's possibly slightly clearer advice in MPF4 about, you know, what constitutes a brownfield site. In terms of the amount of area, I think in this case the planning service have accepted that it's partially brownfield because of the remains of this building. There's nothing that says where that boundary might finish and greenfield start. I mean, the site has clearly got a defined boundary with the hedging and the fencing, but the building, as you've seen, is the footprint of the building is very much in the centre of that site. There would have been an area of ground associated with that building round about it to access it, for example, a yard area or the access into it, which you could possibly also argue is previously developed rather than greenfield. Mr. Fogg may want to come in.
I think Mr. Fogg was quite happy taking the opportunity not to come in, but if forced off the fence. I think it was accepted that the site is at least in part brownfield, and that policy applies. I think that policy applies, and I don't think you can start setting limits to how much consideration you give to it. And it is accepted by the case officer who dealt with it first instance that part of the site is brownfield land. So I don't think can be any question that the relevant policies of both the local plan and NPF4 have to be applied in assessing this application.
Councillor Stewart, another question. Back to you.
Thank you, convener. Can I ask about access to the proposed development? I got a sense that it's on a farm access track and not a road to other properties. There was certainly a sense of being in a rural location. So I don't know what your sense of what the access road was like, but is the access from Crooked Devon and Station Road, or is the access to this development the track that leads along to the B9097?
Skip forward a couple of the slides, please, to the white plan with the red line drawing on it. So the built-up area and the main road are well, the main road is off the top of the drawing there, and then Station Road comes down past the hall, and then the edge of the settlement is there, and then it's the track is then the access down to the south and along to the west. I'm just going to see what the specific comments of roads were. If there's anything in particular noted. There was no objection from roads. Just
If you know, if it helps, we have on page 71 the comments from the Transport Development Officer. That person has noted that access to be taken off the A977 via Peak Gate. They go on, I had meant to say this to you because they do go on to say it's unclear whether HGVs could utilise the route for construction and ongoing servicing, and therefore the applicant would be required to provide a swept path analysis to show that access can be achieved for that purpose. And without it, it wouldn't have the support of transport planning. I think my advice would be that if the committee was otherwise minded to uphold the application, it should be subject to a suspensive condition that no works commence until such time as an appropriate swept path analysis is presented and accepted by the transport planner.
Thank you, Mr. Fogg. Thank you, convener.
Fine. So passing from questions then, members, do we feel that we can now proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Harvey
No, I'm fine.
and Councillor Stewart.
Proceed.
Okay. I too am happy to go ahead. So on that basis, if I may, I will start us off on this one. It's quite a complicated application, I think, in some way. Much of it circles on the definition of brownfield, and then how much of the site is brownfield. I think it's all been agreed that, except that this is a brownfield site, and I'm inclined to be along the lines that if it's brownfield, it's brownfield. You can't differentiate within that site. Given that that is the situation, we now come down to, I think, a decision of, in my mind anyway, of whether the actual siting and scaling of the building is acceptable. Having been there, had a look at the site, obviously the houses around it are all detached and 1 or 2 stories, 1.5 stories, so 1 or 1.5 or 2 story. I am inclined on this one, I think, on balance, to agree the appeal. I think it's acceptable to use it as a brownfield site. There is a boundary around the site, which we're told is from 2016. It seems to be reasonably well established. It's a 2-story building, but it's not overly large. It's surrounded by other detached 2-story buildings. So on this occasion, I think I'm inclined to agree the appeal, subject to all the normal conditions that we would have, plus the suspensive condition, as we mentioned, for displays to be seen for the construction of traffic. Councillor Harvey, would like to come in.
Thank you, convener. You've taken the words out of my mouth as well. Considering the various issues in this case, I think the brownfield issue and the decision to expand the brownfield into the area surrounding the actual brownfield is probably reasonable, judging by the way that the philosophies are written, not philosophies, sorry, the conditions are written. I think some of the objections noted visual amenity. I'm really, having visited the site myself, I'm not really seeing that at all. The building plans, if they're followed, seem to be in keeping with the kind of buildings you see in this area and wider parts of Perthshire and Fife. And therefore, I would also, the condition, I'm assuming a swept path analysis is related to traffic conditions and road conditions.
It was really specifically related to construction traffic.
Construction traffic, yep. Okay, well, having the same condition as the convener mentioned, I would also uphold the appeal.
And Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, convener. Yes, as you said, convener, you pointed out about the brownfield site, and I think we can establish that there is an element of brownfield. However, on the refusal, I would agree with officers on the reasons for refusal in paragraph 3 and 4.
Thank you, councillor. So Mr Fogg, we have a majority decision here, 2-1. Anything you want to bring on that?
Just for the purpose of the minute and decision notice, I'm clarifying. Yes, Councillor Stewart, your position is that, did you say you were not supporting the appointed officer in relation to the first and second reason for refusal, but you were siding with them in relation to the third and fourth reason?
That's correct, Mr Fogg.
Convener, can I maybe just check as well? We would obviously be looking for a condition with regard to the passing place and the contaminated land assessment requested by the environmental health. I don't think there were any contributions required.
Fine, thank you very much. We'll now move on to the next item, which is number 4.2. This is a siting of a caravan and 2 storage containers, erection of decking, fence and gates, formation of parking areas and associated works in retrospect, land 30 metres south of Kinfauns House on Church Road, Kinfauns, Perth. Mrs Tierney, if you could introduce this one.
Thank you, Convener. So location of the appeal property here, just to the north of the A90 up at Kinfauns, there where the yellow star indicates the location. Next slide, please. And then as we come in closer to the village there of Kinfauns, a number of properties that run along Church Road and up the hill as well. And the application site is circled there in yellow. Next slide, please. This is the application site plan, location plan submitted with the application. So the wider land in the applicant's ownership is the blue that we can see, and the red area along the roadsides there down in the bottom left, that's the location of the caravan and the 2 containers. Next slide, please. This is one of the site plans that's been submitted with the application. So across the field, none of that is development. It's all related to the operation of the market garden, if you like. But along the roadside, on the left-hand side there and along the bottom road as well, there will be a more close-up drawing, but we can see where the caravan and one of the containers is on the left-hand side, and then the other container down beside the other road. Next slide, please. This is zooming in on the kind of top left-hand area of the drawing. So Church Road on the left-hand side there. Kinfauns House is located just to the top there of the drawing. And there is a parking area created through an existing field access at the top of the site. And then you see the footprint of the caravan. Next slide, please. And then this is the bottom part of the site. Again, just at the top there, you can see the footprint of the caravan. And then the first of the 2 containers just at the left-hand side of the drawing there. The bottom of the drawing shows another parking area. This was included within the application. The roads consultation required that to be removed from the drawings or the subsequent drawings. And then along the other minor road, the U82, you can see the other shipping container at the bottom of the site there. Next slide, please. And then this is just moving up towards the other part of the ground in their ownership, which will be used for the market garden. There are no structures, certainly as part of this application in this part of the site. Next slide, please. Yeah, and again, just a closer up image there of where the caravan is, the first of the containers on the left-hand side up Church Road, and then the other container on the bottom road. Next slide, please. Some elevation and floor plans and roof plan of the caravan, which it's in situ, so you'll see some photographs of it as well. Next slide, please. And then these are the elevation on the top of the slide. There is the elevations of the shipping containers, and then the gates that are proposed at the 2 access points and within the site, post-and-wire fencing. Next slide, please. And then these are just a couple of images. Roads were requesting information about swept path. The one on the left there is for a smaller vehicle, such as a car, and the one on the right there is for a larger vehicle, such as a lorry. Next slide, please. So as I said, this is a retrospective application. So the caravan and the 2 containers exist on the site. So the yellow arrow indicates, as you can see, the white caravan there, and the shipping container is down in front of that. The red arrow shows you the location of Kinfauns House up the hill behind the application site. Next slide, please. This is from the bottom, the low road there. Kinfauns House is in behind those trees, looking from this direction. And again, where the yellow arrow is, you can see the location of the caravan and the shipping container in front of it. This is as you come along the road, so we can start to see Kinfauns House come into view, where the red arrow is. Your shipping container on the bottom road on the right hand side, and then the other container and the caravan on the left hand side there. Next slide, please. And then this is as we come further along the road. Again, Kinfauns House in the background there, and the caravan in front of it. And the image on the right is the remainder of the field towards the top part of the ground in their ownership, which has been planted. This is now from the west towards where the church is and the other properties that are accessed from that road. The left-hand arrow is the access into the site where the parking would be, and the right-hand arrow is where the caravan and one of the shipping containers is. This is looking east. Next slide, please. And then this is looking from the north side down to the south towards the River Tay, that existing field access, which would be taken to use as access for the site. Next slide, please. And then this is looking back along Church Road to where those other properties are. And on the right-hand image, the access into the site, and the red arrow shows the access into Kinfauns House. And this is looking at it from Church Road again, the access into Kinfauns House and the access into the development. Next slide, please. This is coming into the site now, so we can see the shipping container on the bottom road on the left-hand side, and then the caravan on the right with the other shipping container. And then this is now moving from Kinfauns House and north towards the south. So you can see the caravan there on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, the caravan is adjacent to the road. And again, you can see the other shipping container across the field at the bottom. Next slide, please. Closer up image of the caravan from the roadside, and then the container from the roadside. Next slide, please. And then just some more images of those containers. And then from further down the road, looking back up, we can see the shipping container, the caravans behind it, Kinfauns House, obviously, and the other container. Next slide, please. This is from within the site now. You can see there's been some new planting and so on around the perimeter of the caravan. Next slide, please. And then coming round, and the other side of the caravan closest to the road. Next slide, please. And then this is just to demonstrate the market garden area that's been cultivated. Next slide, please. This is from the site back out to the main road, where the access into the site would be for vehicular traffic. And then another image from just the roadside there at the access point. So yes, this is a retrospective application for the siting of a caravan and 2 storage containers, erection of decking, fencing, gates, formation of parking areas and associated works. At land 30 metres south of Kinfauns House, Church Road, Kinfauns. The site is located in the countryside, Greenbelt, the Sidlaw Hills local landscape area, the River Tay SAC catchment, and the transport infrastructure full contribution zone. The land which contains the caravan and the containers is a field directly in front and south of the Category C listed Kinfauns House, the easternmost dwelling house of the established building group along Church Road in Kinfauns, which, although partially screened by trees, is still a prominent and visible property. To the western end of the building group are several other heritage assets, including the B-listed Old School, C-listed Churchyard, and ruined earlier church, which is a scheduled monument. The wider landscape is agricultural and contains other polytunnel structures. The static caravan has already been placed on the ground alongside one of the 2 containers on the west boundary with Church Road, and the other container is at the bottom of the site beside the U82. A recently created access at the road junction of Church Road and the U82 has been removed from this proposal following comments from the transport planning team. The applicant owns the field measuring 2.02 hectares and is establishing a market garden which the caravan and containers are associated with because the applicant lives in Edinburgh. A septic tank is proposed to the north of the caravan and a surface water soakaway to the south. For information, there are 3 prior consent appeals underway with the DPEA for a greenhouse, a polytunnel and another polytunnel. The reasons for refusal are firstly that the proposal is contrary to policies 29, Rural Development Parts A and B, and 17, Rural Homes Part A5 of MPF 4, and policies 8, Rural Business and Diversification, and 19, Housing in the Countryside of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2. The proposal fails to meet the relevant criteria for countryside development to be justified in the case of the caravan and fails to achieve a high quality of design in the case of the caravan and the containers. Secondly, the proposal is contrary to policy 8 Greenbelt of MPF 4 and policy 43 Greenbelt Part B of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2. The proposal fails to demonstrate that the proposed static caravan is essential for agriculture or horticulture in a greenbelt location. The siting and appearance of the proposed static caravan and storage containers undermines the purpose of the Perth Greenbelt by failing to protect and enhance the character, landscape setting and identity of settlements. Thirdly, the proposal is contrary to policies 13, Sustainable Transport, and 60B, Transport Standards and Accessibility Requirements of the Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan 2. Insufficient information has been provided by the applicant in respect of vehicle access and egress from the site via the northwest corner gate access, in addition to details of how desludging would be undertaken from the proposed parking area. And finally, the proposal is contrary to policies 7, Historic Assets and Places, Part C, and 14, Design Quality and Place, Part C, and 29, Rural Development, Part B of MPF 4, and placemaking policies 1A and 1B, Parts B, C and D, and 27A listed buildings of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2. The proposed development is poorly designed, detrimental to the character and amenity of the surrounding area, and appears visually incongruous and out of keeping with the nearby built environment and wider landscape setting. The proposed development also adversely impacts the setting of several listed buildings and fails to preserve their character, special architectural or historic interest. So in terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, there are a number of development plan policies which are applicable. In terms of MPF, policy 29, Rural Development, which states that development proposals that contribute to the viability, sustainability and diversity of rural communities and local economy will be supported. In this case, the proposal does not involve a diversification of an existing business, an essential community service, essential infrastructure, reuse of a building, use of a heritage asset, reuse of brownfield land, small-scale development to support new ways of working, or development which involves improvement or restoration of the natural environment, although it is noted that the trees are proposed to be planted within the applicant's wider ownership. Two of the criteria have potential relevance as a land use business and as a production and processing facility for local food production. However, Clause B, development proposals in rural areas should be suitably scaled, sited and designed to be in keeping with the character of the area, and consider how they will contribute towards local living and take into account the transport needs of the development as appropriate for the rural location. The caravan and containers are highly visible in the immediate and wider landscape and are out of keeping with the setting of the residences along Church Road and the Category C listed Kinfauns House to the north. LDP Policy 8, Rural Business and Diversification, states that favourable consideration will be given to the expansion of existing businesses and the creation of new ones in rural areas, and there is a preference that this will generally be within or adjacent to existing settlements. Sites out with settlements may be acceptable where they offer opportunities to diversify an existing business or are related to an existing site-specific resource or opportunity. New countryside business proposals need to meet several criteria. A, that the proposal will contribute to the local economy through the provision of permanent employment. In this case, the proposal is associated with a proposed market garden business in the wider field. However, exact employment numbers are unknown beyond the two directors of the business who are the applicants. B, the proposal will not result in suburbanisation of the rural area or encourage unsustainable travel patterns. In this case, the site is greenfield and the proposal undermines the setting of the adjacent, well-defined building group. Travel to and from the site is by private car and there is a lack of local facilities and services close by. C, the proposed use is compatible with surrounding land uses and will not detrimentally impact on the amenity of residential properties within or adjacent to the site. In this case, it's considered that the distance from nearby residences will sufficiently protect residential amenity. D, the proposal can be satisfactorily accommodated within the landscape and environmental capacity of the site. In this case, while some tree planting is proposed, the location and appearance of the caravan and containers is of a poor quality and incongruous within a context of the established character of the area. E, the proposal meets a specific need by virtue of its quality or location in relation to existing business or tourist facilities. In this case, the applicant suggests they intend to keep sheep ancillary to the running of the market garden business. There is no justification for the applicant to be on site for animal welfare reasons. While some storage associated with the rural business may be supportable, the containers are not appropriate and the caravan is visually incongruous in this location. And F, where any new building or extensions are proposed, they should achieve a high quality of design to reflect the rural nature of the site and be in keeping with the scale of the existing buildings. In this case, the caravan and containers are not buildings, but notwithstanding this, the proposal cannot be considered a high quality design which reflects the rural nature of the site. In terms of Greenbelt, MPF 4 Policy 8 requires that development proposals within a greenbelt designated within the LDP will only be supported if they are for development associated with agriculture, essential accommodation required and designed for key workers in primary industries within the immediate vicinity of their place of employment, horticulture, including market gardening and directly connected retailing, as well as community growing, demonstrate why an alternative location is not suitable and why the greenbelt location is essential, not undermine the purpose of the greenbelt, be compatible with the surrounding established countryside and landscape character, be designed to ensure it is of an appropriate scale, massing and appearance, and use materials that minimise visual impact and must not create significant long-term impacts on the environmental quality of the greenbelt. It has not been demonstrated that the siting of the caravan is essential for the operation of the business, and it also undermines the purpose of the greenbelt to restrict development immediately out with the Perth settlement boundary. While some storage associated with a market garden could be acceptable, the location and appearance of the containers is detrimental, as is the caravan. LDP Policy 43, Greenbelt, Criteria A and B are applicable. Development must also be appropriate to the overall objectives of the Greenbelt to protect and enhance the character, landscape setting and identity of settlements. It has not been demonstrated that the siting of the caravan is essential for the operation of the business, and it undermines the purpose of the Greenbelt. While some storage can be acceptable, the containers and the caravan are detrimental in this location. In terms of design, layout and landscape, there is a levels difference of around 10 metres between the top of the field, beside Kinfauns House, and the U82 road at the bottom of the field. The wider building group at Kinfauns is prominently visible in the immediate and wider area. The proposals visually detract from the pleasant visual setting of the group. While the applicant has highlighted the existence of seasonal polytunnels nearby associated with Toft Hill Farm, these are seasonal. The containers and caravan are more prominent and detrimental to the wider rural and historic setting in this location. In terms of conservation considerations, the conservation team highlight that the proposed development is directly to the south of the Category C listed Kinfauns House. The area of land is historically undeveloped, having been used as grazing and growing of crops, and forms part of the open rural setting of the former manse, framed by woodland to the north. While there has been more recent development within Kinfauns, it forms an attractive historic building group. The development is visually intrusive within the open setting of the listed buildings, interrupting key views and detracting from their historic character, and the proposal therefore fails to preserve or enhance the setting of these buildings, contrary to NPF 4 Policy 7 Historic Assets and Places and LDP 2 Policy 27A listed buildings. In terms of roads and access, 2 vehicle access points are shown. The northwest corner access is an existing gate into the field, and a new access to the bottom of the field has been created at the bellmouth of the junction of Church Road and the U82. The Council's Transport Planning team has advised that this be removed, and revised drawings have been submitted showing new planting in that area. However, concerns remain as insufficient detail has been provided in respect of both access and egress of vehicles at the northwest access point, with turning manoeuvres being contained on the carriageway. Updated drawings only show swept path for a lorry entering the site. No details of foul drainage discharge from the caravan have been provided, or of how septic tank desludging would be undertaken. The septic tank location is shown north and uphill of the caravan, but it's not clear if the parking area is sufficient for a tanker access. The proposal therefore fails to accord with the intent of NPF 4 Policy 13, Sustainable Transport, and LDP 2 Policy 60B, Transport Standards and Accessibility Requirements. In terms of drainage and flooding, the location of a septic tank and soakaway, surface water soakaway, has been shown on the drawings. Had the principle of development been acceptable, further details of drainage would have been sought, and it's not a reason for refusal. In terms of natural heritage and biodiversity, it is unlikely that there will be a significant effect on the River Tay Special Area of Conservation, and an appropriate assessment is not required. While no ecological information has been provided and there is no ecological reason for refusal, more information on biodiversity would have been sought if the principle of development was acceptable. The case that the applicant has made states that since purchasing the land in 2023, they have sought to establish a market garden, and other prior notification applications have been submitted for polytunnels and a greenhouse. Those are the ones which I referred to earlier on appeal to the Scottish Government. The containers are required for storage of equipment to work the land and are secure storage given the applicant does not live at the site but in Edinburgh. The caravan is therefore required for occasional overnight accommodation and welfare facilities. They have so far planted over 200 trees and shrubs and repaired fencing, and they've planted various vegetable beds. It is suggested that the labour requirement for a market garden is very high compared to arable cropping and the keeping of livestock. As the business progresses, they will eventually be on site for increasing periods of time, and they intend to keep sheep there in the future who will need cared for. The site is 2 hectares, and it's suggested the labour requirement for fruit, vegetables, peas, beans, top and soft fruits, outdoor vegetables and salad is 8,005 hours per annum per hectare, and in this case that would equate to 16,010 hours. One worker is required for 1,900 hours, suggesting a need for 8.42 labour units in this case. The applicants suggest that Kinfauns House is not prominent and only minimally visible. It is argued that the caravan is essential for their current needs while on site, and without it they cannot develop the business. LDP Policy 19 states that some form of temporary accommodation is acceptable, provided the need for on-site accommodation is demonstrated, and that in terms of MPF 4 Policy 17, it will support the sustainable management of a viable rural business or croft. The field has previously been sparse and they have improved the biodiversity of the site, such that the environmental quality of the area will be improved, and the proposed planting will ensure no adverse impact on the landscape character of the area. Horticulture is allowed in the Greenbelt. While the southwest access has been removed from the plans, this is the only practical entrance to the field. With regard to landscape impact, Kinfauns House is largely hidden. Trees and hedges have and will be planted, and the caravan and containers can be made any colour or clad with timber. There is a further personal statement from the applicant about their registration with the NFU and the Soils Association and their participation in the New Organic Entrepreneurs Programme, and that the Scottish Government is encouraging towards the growing of organic produce by Scotland's people. There are problems with using other areas of ground for the buildings, including space and drainage. There is historical evidence that the entrance at the southwest corner of the field has previously been in use. So in terms of other matters, there were 13 objections to the application, including visually out of character with the area and the surrounding landscape, adverse impact on the setting of historic buildings, including the listed Kinfauns House, inappropriate land use in the Greenbelt, no economic justification for on-site worker accommodation, even at weekends, at a site of this size and nature. Applicant has shown disregard for the planning process by not first obtaining permission. It sets a poor example for unauthorised or similar development elsewhere. The applicant's true intentions are in question, including possibility of a new dwelling house being applied for in the future. Noise nuisance to residents even if trees are planted, which will take years to establish. Excessive height, overlooking, light pollution, loss of open space, loss of biodiversity, including adverse impact on red squirrels and badgers, drainage and water supply concerns. No agricultural work has been undertaken on the land when the application was first submitted. A genuine business would have addressed the agricultural aspect before accommodation and storage. Road safety concerns regarding the southwest access point at an already hazardous road junction, over provision of parking at 2 separate locations within the field, and loss of outlook to residents. In terms of other considerations, a payment of £1,828 is required, developer contributions, given the location of the site within the full transport infrastructure contribution zone, using the holiday accommodation rate, given the proposed occasional semi-permanent use of the caravan. The applicant has suggested in recent correspondence with the Planning Authority that the proposed caravan is justifiable for health reasons. However, such matters do not outweigh the proposal's fundamental conflict with the development plan. In terms of local living, it could be argued that living close to a place of work somewhat contributes positively towards achieving that concept. However, again, this is not sufficient to outweigh the conflict with the development plan. Thank you.
Give a long introduction. We'll go to some questions then. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. I have no questions.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. I have a couple of questions just to clarify. I think the main issue I have is with the requirement for the caravan on site. And there seems to be a quite big difference between what we say and what the applicants, or not we, the council planning department say, and what the applicant says. What would be the basis of the amount of people they might need on site, or the requirement for accommodation on site? Is there any basis for that in our viewpoint, in your opinion?
So I think it fundamentally comes down to whether it's seen as being a viable rural business, which means it does need to be there. Now they have established it, and they've given an indication there about labour unit requirements and the amount of hours and so on. I think the thing that's slightly odd, I suppose, is that you would normally expect that to be a need for a full-time worker, but they're not going to actually be living there on a full-time basis. So that's definitely a question.
I have a follow-up if that's okay. So would you kind of surmise from your comment that it's maybe not a fully developed kind of business plan for this, or not an established plan? It's maybe kind of, I don't want to paraphrase, but maybe not fully developed.
Yes, councillor, I think that's right. The other thing you would normally expect with an application like this is some kind of report from an agricultural consultant or something in terms of the business, what it is, and so on. I mean, I appreciate it's horticulture, it's not agriculture, but yes, there's little information in terms of the business.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you. I have no questions either. So members, can we now proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that the information contained in the papers, the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Stewart,
Proceed.
Councillor Harvey,
Proceed.
and I'm happy to proceed as well. So Councillor Harvey, can you kick off on this one?
Yeah. Yes, thank you, convener. It's a little bit complicated. I don't really buy some of the aspects as part of the view, because I think the view of the caravan and that from the houses is pretty much blocked, as well as the historic monuments. However, the condition 1 is the one that bothers me as well. As I just discussed there, I don't think the proposal meets relevant criteria for countryside development to be justified for the caravan, because I don't think it's an established business as yet, and there's no real obvious requirement for someone to be on site, either even temporarily or permanently. So I will uphold the refusal.
Councillor Stewart.
I would go with upholding the refusal on the reasons set out in the letter 17th of May.
Thank you very much. I'm going to concur with you on this occasion. Visited the site yesterday myself. Undoubtedly, in my mind, the containers and the caravan do not contribute to the character or amenity of the area. What I've seen of work done doesn't seem to justify even a temporary caravan on site during the growing season. And even if the containers were clad in timber, they are totally in the wrong position and are, as I say, give a poor a detriment of the character of the area, undoubtedly. So I'm afraid on this occasion I'm going to refuse the appeal as well. So, Mr. Fogg, we have a unanimous decision to refuse. Thank you. Okay, members, we'll now move on to the next case, which is number 4.3 this afternoon. And this is the erection of 5 holiday accommodation units, a manager's accommodation unit and workshop garage formation for vehicular parking areas, landscaping and associated works. Land 150 metres northwest of Barnhill Farm, Power Mill Dollar. Mr. Tierney, if you'd introduce this one.
Thank you, convener. So some images first, a location plan here showing the location of the appeal site to the south of Pow Mill. Next slide, please. And then zooming in a bit closer with the main road A977 from Pow Mill to the north there, and then the more minor road that leads down to the farm at Barnhill Farm at the bottom of the slide there, and the application site just highlighted with the yellow circle. Next slide, please. Again, this is the site plan that's been submitted with the application, which shows the red line site boundary of the application site at the bottom of that kind of red line there, and the access road is included in the red line boundary all the way from the site up to the minor road at the top. Next slide, please. Coming into the application site itself, so a red line site boundary, with some trees along the north side of the boundary, the access along the eastern side. There's also a gas pipeline route which runs just along the top side there of the north side of the application site boundary. Next slide, please. This is the proposed site layout plan for the development, which consists of 6 buildings, 5 of them being the holiday accommodation units and 1 of them being a manager's accommodation unit. 4 of them, they're all 2-storey properties, 4 of them of one style, 2 of another. The access road into the development of the existing access track, some existing trees on the north boundary, the red dotted ones on the top boundary there are trees to be removed, and there's also, as you can see, some proposed new planting. Next slide, please. Some images of the properties that are proposed. These are there's 4 of these buildings. 3 of them would be holiday units. 1 of them is the manager's accommodation, and then the 2 other holiday units, slightly different design. Next slide, and the garage and storage building for the manager's unit. Next slide, please. So this gives you an understanding of the levels across the site. So in the middle is obviously the site layout plan with the sections across the site. So there are varying levels across the site, as you can see, particularly on the left-hand side there, which shows the properties inserted. They run from the track on the left-hand side downhill towards the bottom of the site, and the same looking in the opposite direction. Next slide, please. This would be the kind of the engineering drawing that's been submitted with the application in terms of the road, some of the works to the ground levels and so on, and the drainage proposals. Next slide, please. These are some images that have been submitted by the applicant within their papers. So some viewpoints that they've taken photographs of. The application site in red there, Barnhill Farm in blue, and then the 3 points where they've chosen to take the view images from. Next slide, please. So the first one here, view 1, from the road to the southwest of the site. Next slide. And then moving around to the south. And then again, moving further around. So some photographs now. This is the access into the site from the minor road to the north. So the image on the left is towards the west of the junction, and the image on the right is to the east of the junction. And then as we now look into the track that takes you down to the application site, on the left-hand side, that's looking from the junction to the south, and then on the right-hand side, you're looking from the track back up towards the junction. The timber fencing there on the left-hand side, and you can see it in the other image as well, is the enclosure for the waste bins, which are associated with the residential development that is ongoing. Next slide, please. And then this is moving down towards the bottom of the site to the south. So we can now see the application of view site coming to view, where the arrow indicates the site. And again, closer on the right-hand side, in behind the trees, and you can see the pole there of the indicating the location of the gas line. And then this is looking a little bit further round from the track, in behind the trees where the site is located. Next slide, please. This is looking from the the north side of the site, looking back up the track now, just to give you an impression of the wider landscape. And again, the location of that, the indication of the gas line. Next slide, please. And then this is starting to look at the application site in more detail. The left-hand image is some of the trees that exist along the northern boundary of the site. They extend across the other side of the site along the track on the right-hand side there. Next slide, please. And then this is looking to the top part of the north part of the site, beside the track, looking west. A small area of kind of hardcore and fencing has already been erected there. Next slide, please. And then this is looking back up to the access, which would be the access point into the development. Next slide, please. This is now looking across the application site from the south side. And then right from the bottom of the site to the south, nearest to Barnhill Farm, we're looking right across at the application site as highlighted there. This is looking along the bottom track, which doesn't form part of the application, but this is the southern boundary of the application site. Next slide, please. And then again, this is looking back towards the track and Barnhill Farm on the right-hand side there. You can see the collection of buildings at the farm there. And then this is looking from the most western point of the application site, looking back up the site towards the east and where the existing trees are. And then looking from behind the fence into the application site itself. And then you probably get a bit better impression of here of some of the levels as well. This is just looking north towards the northern boundary of the site. And then this is looking northwest to the western boundary of the site. And then this is looking again west, but further into the development site. And then looking back from the west across to the development site. So by way of introduction and background, the proposal is for 6 detached 2-storey accommodation units, 5 to be holiday lodges and 1 to be a manager's residence and a workshop and garage in a countryside location to the northwest of Barnhill Farm near Pow Mill. The application site is within a coal low risk area and the inner, middle and outer zones of an SGN gas pipeline. The substantive part of the application site is flanked by a core path which also runs along the access track north to the U223 public road. A future potential path route runs south from the site towards Barnhill Farm. The substantive part of the application site, oh, I've already said that, sorry. The site is exposed to the south, east, south and southwest by virtue of its open hillside location, which slopes downwards in these directions. There's a field access gate and small area of hardcore in the northeast corner. In terms of the reasons for refusal, firstly, the proposed holiday accommodation is contrary to policies 9, brownfield, vacant and derelict land and empty buildings, Part B, 29, rural development, Part B, and 30, tourism of MPF 4, and policies 8, rural business and diversification, and 9C, caravan sites, chalets and timeshare developments, chalets, timeshare and fractional ownership of the Perth and Kinross LDP2. The proposal, which is on a greenfield site, fails to meet the relevant criteria for countryside development to be justified and fails to meet a specific need by virtue of its quality or location in relation to existing businesses or tourist facilities. Secondly, the proposed manager's residence is contrary to Policy 17, Rural Homes, Part A of MPF 4, Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2, and associated housing in the countryside supplementary guidance, as the proposal fails to demonstrate an essential need for a worker to live permanently at or near their place of work. Thirdly, the proposal, by virtue of its inappropriate size, scale, layout and design on an exposed rural hillside plot, fails to respect the character, appearance and visual amenity of the area. The proposal is contrary to Policy 14C, Design, Quality and Place of MPF 4, and Policies 1A and 1B, Placemaking, and 19, Housing in the Countryside of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2 and the associated supplementary guidance. And finally, the proposal, by virtue of its excessive access gradients within the site, the absence of information regarding waste collection vehicle manoeuvrability within the site, the absence of detail regarding passing places along the private access road, and its remoteness from public transport infrastructure is contrary to Policy 13, Sustainable Transport of MPF 4, Policy 60B, Transport Standards and Accessibility Requirements, New Development Proposals of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2, and the requirements of designing streets and the National Roads Development Guide. In terms of rural business and development, MPF 4 Policy 29, Rural Development, states that development proposals that contribute to the viability, sustainability and diversity of rural communities and local rural economy will be supported. They should be suitably scaled, sited and designed to be in keeping with the character of the area. They should also consider how the development will contribute towards local living and take into account the transport needs of the development as appropriate for the rural location. The design, scale and siting would not be in keeping with this rural greenfield site, which is not contained by natural features other than along its northwest boundary with sparse tree coverage. The site is also visible in wider views to the south due to its sloping hillside location. The location would also be predominantly car dependent due to its remoteness from public transport infrastructure and public road network. LDP 2 Policy 8, Rural Business and Diversification, states that the Council will give favourable consideration to the expansion of existing businesses and the creation of new ones in rural areas. There is a preference that this will generally be within or adjacent to existing settlements. Sites out with settlements may be acceptable where they offer opportunities to diversify an existing business or are related to an existing site-specific resource or opportunity. It goes on to state that proposals for new tourism-related developments and the expansion of existing facilities will be supported where it can be demonstrated that they improve the quality of new or existing visitor facilities, allow a new market to be exploited or extend the tourism season. Proposals for new tourism-related developments must be justified through a business plan. This site is out with a settlement boundary, is not diversification of an existing business, and within agricultural land isolated from the steading at Barnhill Farm. A business plan has been submitted with financial information and details of the type of amenities which would be provided to guests, including bicycles and cooked breakfasts. The site is not within unreasonable driving distance of tourist amenities in Kinrossshire and wider afield. However, this proximity is neither site-specific nor exceptional. In addition, the field does not constitute a site-specific resource or opportunity in this instance. While the proposal may offer a guest experience of a certain quality, it is unclear what new market would be exploited or whether the tourism season would be extended. In any case, this fails to overcome concerns relating to the greenfield nature of the site, the design's failure to respond to its context, and the sprawling nature of the proposal across a fairly exposed rural location. While potentially acceptable designs in a more urban setting, the 6 properties are large and visible and do not benefit from any self-containment in the landscape. The site is exposed to the southeast, south and southwest by virtue of its open hillside location, which slopes downwards, and the 6 buildings would appear prominent in the wider views from the south, including public roads, the core path network, and to members of the public exercising responsible access to the countryside. It is remote from the public road network and public transport. In terms of holiday accommodation, MPF 4 Policy 30 Tourism states that proposals for tourism-related development will take into account the contribution made to the local economy, compatibility with the surrounding area in terms of the nature and scale of the activity and impacts of increased visitors, Impacts on communities, for example, by hindering the provision of homes and services for local people. Opportunities for sustainable travel and appropriate management of parking and traffic generation, and scope for sustaining public transport services, particularly in rural areas. Accessibility for disabled people, measures taken to minimise carbon emissions, and opportunities to provide access to the natural environment. The proposed holiday accommodation units would make a modest contribution to the local economy by providing visitor accommodation in rural Kinrossshire. The impact on the local community in terms of increased traffic along what is already a narrow U223 public road and the private access track must be considered. The proposal would result in an unacceptable visual impact on the countryside by virtue of its introduction of an urban character to a mostly open hillside location, would be too remote from sustainable transport options, and would contribute to a suburbanisation of the countryside. LDP2 Policy 9C, Chalet's timeshare and fractional ownership, states that developments should meet a specific need by virtue of its quality or location in relation to existing tourism facilities. The proposal may be within driving distance of tourism amenities, but it is not considered close enough that a specific need exists for development at this particular site. A high quality of guest experience is proposed. However, this is outweighed by the lack of justification for greenfield development, and the response to the rural site context is unacceptably suburban in nature. In addition, there are challenges in terms of roads, access and sustainable transport, and the close proximity to a core path isn't enough to overcome these concerns. The argument made by the applicant that there is a lack of accommodation locally for the likes of Knockhill is undermined by the recent approval of 124 holiday lodges on a former quarry within the local area, itself a brownfield site much more suitable for sustainable redevelopment than the greenfield, which is the subject of this application. With regard to housing in the countryside, MPF 4 Policy 17, Rural Homes Part A, applies to the manager's unit. New homes in rural areas will be supported, subject to it being suitably scaled, sited and designed to be in keeping with the character of the area. As already highlighted, the development is not. The proposed development must be necessary to support the sustainable management of a viable rural business or croft, and there is an essential need for a worker to live permanently at or near their place of work. While the business plan sets out the applicant's intent to provide a high level of service to guests in the form of cooking, concierge services and cleaning, this is not an adequate demonstration of the essential need for a worker to live permanently on site. In applying LDP 2 Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside, the economic activity clause in the supplementary guidance must be considered in terms of a new house to support a new or expanded business. Where the house is to be associated with an expanded or proposed economic activity, construction of the house will not be permitted in advance of the development or expansion of the business. The Council wishes to encourage the expansion of existing businesses and the creation of new ones in line with Policy 8, Rural Business and Diversification. There must be reasonable certainty, however, that the business will succeed before allowing a new house to be built in the countryside. The guidance goes on to discuss temporary accommodation where the need for an on-site worker has been demonstrated. However, no such need has been justified. In terms of design, layout and visual amenity, MPF 4 Policy 14, Design Quality and Place, states that development proposals will be designed to improve the quality of an area, whether in urban or rural locations and regardless of scale, and development proposals that are poorly designed, detrimental to the amenity of the surrounding area, or inconsistent with the 6 qualities of successful places will not be supported. LDP 2 Policy 1A, Placemaking, states that design, density and siting of development should respect the character and amenity of the place, whereas Policy 1B, B and C expects proposals to consider and respect site topography and any surrounding important landmarks, views or skylines, as well as the wider landscape character of the area, and the design and density should complement its surroundings in terms of appearance, height, scale, massing, materials, finishes and colours. The siting of the development fails to respect the character and amenity of the place and does not consider the wider landscape character. It does not complement its surroundings due to its isolation from established built form, the absence of existing natural features, and the incongruous suburban appearance of the six detached two-storey units and their linear layout which sprawls across the site. In terms of residential amenity, the proposal is sufficiently distanced from the nearest residences at Barnhill Farm and the Paddocks development at Pitfar Steading that the proposed buildings would not overshadow, overlook or cause excessive noise or disturbance. In terms of roads and access, while the increased number of vehicles utilising the U223 and the private vehicle access, local residents have raised concerns with the number of vehicle movements utilising this. Further details of mitigation in the form of passing places, both on the private track and the U223, were requested by the transport planning team. While the agents sought further clarity regarding what would be required in terms of passing places, the view was taken that it would be unreasonable to require the applicant to go to such further expense of preparing passing place information when there were more fundamental reasons for refusal. Gradients across the site are excessive, such that it is difficult to accord with designing streets, the National Roads Development Guide, and fails to take account of those with mobility impairments under the Equality Act 2010. The applicant argues that to reduce the gradient would lead to large disparities, with the natural ground level of up to 2.5 metres above existing ground level at the upper end of the site and 4 metres at the southern end, and this would not be practical from an aesthetic or construction perspective. Further information on waste collection is required, as although the applicant has stated this would be from a central location, no waste collection area has been shown and no swept path analysis has been provided. Whilst the site is flanked by a core path on two sides, it is 2.3 kilometres from the nearest bus stop near Pow Mill. The likelihood is that the development will be predominantly car dependent, even if guests choose to utilise the core path for walking or cycling. In terms of natural heritage and biodiversity, of the 11 trees along the north and west boundaries, 4, including 3 tall mature trees, are proposed to be removed. This would leave only 3 large trees along the north boundary of the site, which further reduces what is already sparse natural screening. Whilst the proposed introduction of heavy standard trees is welcomed, none are proposed to the south of the proposed lodges. Whilst this is presumably to maintain views of the landscape, it also means that the lodges would remain highly visible from the south. The ecological report demonstrates no detrimental impact on biodiversity and wildlife. In terms of the applicant's case, they state that the proposal provides a viable rural business and will provide jobs and benefit other small local businesses compliant with NPF 4 Policy 29. The house element is demonstrated to support the sustainable management of a viable rural business under NPF 4 Policy 17. It is stated that the proposal is the sustainable reuse of vacant land in line with NPF 4 Policy 9 as part of a larger farm which is no longer in operation. Perth and Kinross has a high demand for holiday accommodation, and purpose-built accommodation does not result in the loss or alterations to private dwellings. It is argued there is a specific need by virtue of the quality or location in relation to existing tourism facilities such as Knock Hill, the Ochils, Rumbling Bridge Gorge, horse riding, fishing, and it's very near to the Heart 2000 tourist route. They intend to provide a travel plan encouraging visitors to leave their car and use the available bikes. It is acknowledged that there will be a visual impact, but that the site has a backdrop of trees and more will be planted, which will enhance the screening, add character, and transform the visual appearance of the site, enhancing this partially vacant landscape. The buildings have been designed for the context of the site, are sensitively sited, and are of a high quality design. Other material considerations are noted, including the rise of staycations, the support it will give to other local amenities, in line with Policy 25 Community Wealth Building of NPF 4, and there will be tourism and economic development. The business plan demonstrates the unique selling points of the proposal and the opportunity available backed up by local tourism statistics and market analysis and financial projections. In terms of other matters, Scotland Gas Networks initially objected in respect of proximity to the high pressure gas transmission pipeline, but after further discussion with the applicant an agreement has been reached with regard to a commitment to install a protection crossing point over the pipeline for site traffic. Fossaway and District Community Council object as they do not consider there is an adequate business case, and they're concerned that it is not sustainable because the applicant themselves state at this stage in the proposals the business does not yet have a formalised business plan of comprehensive figures. However, the business intends to focus on 3 main areas of service, sustainability and spending. In addition, the application makes no case for the requirement of a manager's house on site. 21 letters of support were received stating that it will enhance the character of the area, it supports economic development, it is of high quality design, sustainable construction, would increase the amount of quality holiday accommodation locally, it is well located for access to the countryside and other destinations and would contribute to local employment. 12 objections were received, including from Kinrossshire Civic Trust, stating that the development is over-intensive, of a disproportionate scale and height, that the design is residential in nature, adverse effects on visual amenity and landscape, and out of character with the rural character of the area, suburbanisation in the wrong place, it's not brownfield land and could continue to be used for agriculture, road safety concerns due to poor access, conflict between vehicles and pedestrians, lack of passing places, traffic congestion added to the paddocks development, no clarity regarding the responsibility for maintenance of the track, over provision of parking, no public transport options, will not encourage sustainable travel patterns, light and noise pollution, overlooking of neighbours, adverse impact on other holiday sites in the area, a risk that proposals could be sold off speculatively as second-hand holiday homes. Several accommodation options already exist in the area and no tangible evidence has been submitted to demonstrate otherwise. Risk from the nearby gas pipeline, loss of trees, surface water runoff, adverse impact on biodiversity and wildlife, risk to livestock from occupants' dogs, and that many of the supportive comments are not from the local area and do not reflect local sentiment. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll move on to some questions. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, convener. Could I raise about the roads? When I did a site visit, I went in at sort of I imagine it's a U-class road. I went in at the junction at Blair and Gun, and I exited the Pow Mill end. Am I right in hearing that I was not aware of any passing places on the U-class road? Am I right in saying that you were saying that it was not discussed about a passing place on, you said on the private road there's going to be passing places, but that was not discussed because there was other reasons greater than passing places if we had any concerns. Is that my way of hearing things?
So I think because the view of the planning service was that there were more fundamental issues with the principle of development, they didn't go any further in terms of other more detailed discussions for things that would otherwise be required if the development was otherwise acceptable.
Convener, can I just carry on with the same sort of transport kind of theme? This seems to be quite an extensive development, and the site has got quite a gradient. But I'm thinking about, I imagine that this would have to be a 12-month operation to make it viable for the cost. My concern would be in certainly the winter, being inland away from the sea, there will be a lot of issues from frost and ice, but also snowfall, and the U-class road, I imagine, is quite a low priority, although the A977 will be. Was there any conversations with the developer about how they're going to manage if we've got guests coming from other areas that are not used to driving in rural road conditions?
Not as far as I'm aware, councillor, no.
Thank you.
Councillor Harvey?
I had a couple of questions, but Councillor Stewart's already kind of asked one. The other question I had was, I noticed one of the reasons for refusal was the lack of kind of economic business plan, such like. I noticed the applicant has put in what I think anyway is a relatively detailed business plan. Do you think that's enough to satisfy the kind of objection in the original refusal, if you know what I mean?
Councillor, I would agree. It is a detailed business plan that they've put in. It's very much based on establishing the business and their projections, and they have done their homework, I would suggest. You know, it's adequate in that sense of the word, in my opinion. It's the fact that there are wider issues here in terms of you know, the particular location that they've chosen for the development as well.
It's okay to follow up, convener. Just on that, just as a for instance, as we can see in the map on the screen here, there are Fossaway cabins in Pillmill. If this development was like near Pillmill or Blaringon, would it probably be more acceptable? Would you have said? Again, you don't have to answer that if you don't want to.
That could be several thousand planning applications. So, you know, every site's got to be looked at on its own merits. This is a greenfield site. It is fairly remote from, you know, other settlements and roads. I think it would be fair to say if it was closer to more accessible locations and more sustainable in that regard, then there could possibly be more support for it.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, thank you. I have no questions myself. So members, can we now proceed to determine the application? Oh, sorry. Councillor Stewart, you have a question?
I beg your pardon, convener. Could I ask, on my visit yesterday, there's quite an extensive development further north, which looks like a steading type development. When I visited the site and I was looking at the proposed buildings, I couldn't see anything locally. This looked like a street within a series of paddocks and fields. Would I be right in thinking this was more like a streetscape, an urban streetscape?
Councillor, I wouldn't disagree with you. The development that's underway between the site and the major, the minor road to the north, would have been a redevelopment of a brownfield site. So I think there's a combination there of converted buildings from what existed in terms of steadings and some new build housing on what would have been considered a brownfield site. From my own visit to the site, obviously because there's conversions involved and the new houses there have been designed to reflect the style and design they're of a more historic and traditional style, shall we say. You may have your own personal opinion on the design of the properties that are proposed here. There's probably nothing wrong with the design of them. I think the issue for the planning service and for you to consider is whether that particular design is appropriate for this particular location.
Thank you. Sorry for that interruption, convener.
Have you finished? I'll begin. Members, can we now proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information that we have? That is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor. Or do we need more information? Councillor Stewart
I'd like to proceed.
and Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, I'd like to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. So Councillor Stewart, if you could start us off on this one.
Thank you, convener. Yet again, and it seems to be the nature of the local review body that we're dealing with quite complex procedural notes and planning permissions and subjective and objective kind of thoughts. I recognise that Perth and Kinross relies quite heavily on tourism industry, and it's gratifying to see people want to invest, which looks like in this development going to be a substantial amount of money trying to add to the mix of accommodations within Perth and Kinross. However, I am going to side with the Perth and Kinross officers in this situation, that I agree with their letter on dated the 17th of July, the 4 reasons for refusal.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll come on along next behind you. I have been to this site before. There was mention in the paperwork of a previous application on a field adjacent to this, which in that case was a small cabin with a sauna next to it. And I think at the time we were, my colleagues, all of us, I think at that time were happy with the concept of it, but there was no business plan to support it. But there's certainly, I have to say, potential, I think, there for some form of development for a rural holiday area. It is isolated, obviously, and it has that appeal to it, I think, and people obviously like to go to places where they can get away from towns and cities, which also brings up a point we had before, which is this concept of sustainable transport. You can't develop areas like this without having cars, and it's wrong, I think, that we should refuse a site simply because you need to drive a car to it. However, that said, and I say that the area has potential, I think, the siting design of this particular application of 5 properties, 2-storey high, is, in my mind, out of concept of what it should be there. It would be detrimental to the character of the area and the amenity of it. Something along the lines of perhaps glamping pods or 1-storey cabins may well be possible, but in this case, like you, Councillor Stewart, I will have to side for the officers. The whole design is wrong. We're effectively creating a streetscape in a rural area. And as a final point, I cannot see any real justification for a manager's house to be there. These sort of places don't really need that sort of thing. People just travel there to clean up, change the changeover times for the properties, and that's it. There's no need for anybody to be on site, as far as I can tell, and there's no justification for that. So, coming to summing it all up, I'm going to be siding with the officers and refuse the appeal. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, convener. Similarly to my 2 colleagues, this is an interesting development. It's quite a lot of money to be invested in the local community, and quite a nice looking development in its own right. And however, which has been doing a lot of heavy lifting this afternoon. I also agree with my 2 colleagues. The nature of the development, if it was somewhere else, might be okay, but out here, and I've visited the site as well, it just is out of keeping to some extent. Some of the other ones nearby, like Fossaway Cabins and Meadowview and Fife, they're smaller developments with glamping pod type of things, which might be more acceptable, particularly with relation to cyclists and walkers using them. So therefore, I'm going to join my colleagues and upholding the refusal for planning permission.
Thank you for that. So, Mr. Fogg, we have a unanimous decision again. That's fine, as per the officers. So, members, obviously we've done 4-4. You've done that without myself being here. So we'll now move on. We've asked for recess. We'll have a 5-minute recess.
Thank you. Thank
The last paper of the day, which is 5.1. This is the paper that's coming back to us. It was previously before us, but was deferred because there was an ongoing appeal for listed building consent to the DPEA. So a petition that's been made, it's come back to us. So, Mrs. Turney, if you could introduce this one for us.
Yes. So although there was a presentation to the LRB in August when this was deferred, I'll just run through the slides. So location of the property here in central Perth, effectively with South Inch to the south there, and the railway station along to the west, and immediately to the south of the appeal site. Next slide, please. And then just zooming in closer there, the railway line runs along the bottom and the property is directly to the north, just off James Street. Next slide, please. This is the boundary of the application site. So I suppose the main thing to point out would be not a lot of garden ground. It's a plot that's pretty much largely taken up entirely by the dwelling house, apart from 2 small garden areas at the rear and the garden area at the front of the property facing James Street. Next slide, please. These were the floor plans that were submitted with the application for full planning in this case, and also the listed building consent application. And they also indicate the number, the windows in the property. Next slide, please. And then this drawing shows the, although there's no actual images of the previous windows in the property, these are drawings which show the style of the windows which existed in the property prior to the works being carried out. Next slide, please. And again, this is the proposed window types within the property shown on floor plans, including some of the internal alterations which were subject to the listed building consent only. Next slide, please. These are the proposed elevational drawings, which fundamentally show the alterations to the windows in the property, the roof lights, and a replacement door on the north elevation, and a new door created into the south elevation. Next slide, please. And these are the detailed drawings of the style of windows in each of the openings and the doors. And then some photographs of the property. So obviously, as a retrospective application, the windows that you see are the new unauthorised windows. So as you can see, the wall along the front of the property on James Street, front garden area, and the front of the house. Next slide, please. And then just another one looking north. Next slide, please. Some images of other properties on the street. This is from the north end of James Street looking south, with the appeal property right down at the bottom. Next slide, please. A closer image of the front of the property. And then looking up towards the roof, you can just see the roof lights as well. The central one was an original one, and 2 new ones added either side. Next slide, please. Just an image of either side of the property from the front. And some close-ups of the windows that have been installed. So as I said, there was obviously no images of the original drawings provided by the applicant, but they were multi-pane timber sliding sash and case units, and what we've got here are, whilst they are sliding sash and case units, there's obviously not the 12-pane split with astragals that the original units would have had. Next slide, please. This is round the south side of the property. So the railway line is up to the left-hand side there, an area of yard to the left, and then the boundary wall of the property, very close to the gable on that side. Next slide. And then this is the new window on the south gable elevation. Next slide. And then round the rear, a new window here. Next slide, please. And then the remaining window on the south side, which is the one that's proposed to become a new door on that elevation, and the work on that has not taken place yet. And then this is round the north side of the property, so between the mutual boundary wall and that's the north gable of the dwelling house. Next slide, please. And then this is round the rear to an outbuilding attached to the back of the house. The rear window on the north elevation. And a door that's been installed on the north elevation, which is not what's proposed on the drawings. Obviously you can see an area of infilling and the kind of style of the UPVC kind of modern style of that door there. And then some of the smaller windows and the small dormer window on the north elevation. And then this is just some other images of other properties in the street, which is obviously within the Perth Central Conservation Area as well. So in terms of the wider character of the area and the types of windows that we have elsewhere. Next slide, please. Semi-detached property, one on the left, so obviously had some alterations to it. The one on the right certainly looks like those windows may be original. Next slide, please. Again, a variety of window styles. Not entirely sure whether these are original, but they do retain the sash and case style. Next slide, please. This is on the south side of James Street, I should say east side of James Street. Rather than individual houses set back from the street, it's a row of terraces or flats on this side. Next slide, please. So just some other examples. Timber sash and case units. Next slide, please. And again, some other examples of ones where you've got the traditional slide sash and case multi-pane units, and then some other ones where alterations have been made which may not be deemed to be so sympathetic. Next slide, please. So yes, this appeal was deferred at the August meeting pending the outcome of a tandem appeal against refusal of listed building consent to the Department of Planning and Environmental Appeals for the installation of replacement windows and door, internal alterations and installation of gas meter. Part of the appeal was upheld and consent was granted for the installation of the replacement rear door on the north elevation, internal alterations at first floor level, the installation of roof lights and the relocation of the gas meter. However, the appeal against the installation of replacement windows and the creation of a new door on the south elevation was dismissed by the reporter. While it would be unusual for the local review body to come to a different decision than the reporter, it is possible. So obviously I'll continue to outline the alterations proposed. For clarification, the Planning Service asked for a retrospective planning application alongside the listed building consent because the external alterations constitute a material change to the external appearance of the dwelling house, which is located within the Perth Central Conservation Area. To summarise, as the reporter did, the appeal property is a Category C listed cottage within the Perth Central Conservation Area, which is largely residential in nature and is characterised by a range of different building types with different massing, fenestration patterns according to the age of the properties and relationships to the street. The property sits comfortably behind a stone wall, along with the front garden, and makes a valuable contribution to the character and appearance of the conservation area. As has been noted in the appeal, the works are largely retrospective, with all works aside from the replacement door in the north elevation, the new door in the south elevation and the replacement gas meter already having been undertaken. Prior to the carrying out of the works to the building, no assessment of the building's historic or cultural significance was undertaken or submitted by the applicant. With regard to the windows, a total of 11 windows have been replaced, 7 of which were traditional timber single glazed subdivided sash and case units. The remaining windows appear to have been a mixture of smaller traditional sash and case units, along with some double glazed modern replacements. Historic Environment Scotland guidance emphasises that the windows of an historic building form an important element in defining its special character and interest and should be understood before considering alteration. Features such as original glass, slim glazing bars, finish and fixtures all contribute to historic character. However, the appellant did not submit any details or condition survey of the windows prior to their removal and replacement, and so there's little evidence provided to conclusively demonstrate that any of the windows were not original to the property or that the windows were incapable of being repaired. The replacement windows are all double glazed and timber framed, but are a mixture of sliding sashes, casements, a fixed unit and a tilting unit. The installed windows are not all consistent with what is shown on the plans. The new windows feature thick frames and glazing bars, trickle vents, and are otherwise poorly detailed and finished. 7 of the windows display horns, despite there being no evidence of horns being a feature of the building's original window design. All 4 replacement windows to the front east elevation are particularly incongruous as they are no longer subdivided. This has completely changed the character of the property when viewed from public vantage points within the conservation area. The reporter agreed with the council that removing the subdivision of the windows has given the house a greater horizontal emphasis when viewed from the street, which distorts the original design and proportions that contributed to the historic and architectural interest of the cottage. With regard to the door in the south elevation, this in principle follows HAS guidance, which allows for window openings on subsidiary elevations to be enlarged downwards, providing that the original width is maintained. The guidance also advises that any internal joinery, such as shutters or panelling, should be retained and extended down along the length of the enlarged opening. However, the detailed proposals for double doors with thick frames and a horizontal glazed panel above would appear awkwardly proportioned and would harm the appearance of this elevation. No details have been submitted in relation to what would happen to the existing joinery on the interior of this opening. As such, the new door opening, as currently designed and detailed, would be an inappropriate addition that would harm the character of the listed building. With regard to the new door in the north elevation, an ill-fitting UPVC rear door is currently installed, which is both unauthorised and inappropriate. The submitted drawings appear to indicate that this will be replaced by a timber door with a glazed top panel properly positioned in the existing opening. The detailing of this proposed door is poor compared to the previously fully boarded rear door with fanlight above, but as this elevation is completely hidden from public view, it is less sensitive to change and the replacement will have no impact on the character or appearance of the conservation area. With regard to the east front-facing roof slope, this previously featured a centrally positioned roof light which served the single first-floor bathroom. 2 further roof lights have been added to serve the new ensuite bathrooms, along with 4 new vent tiles. Although the vent tiles are not shown on the proposed elevational plans, they are considered to have minimal visual impact. The new roof lights are symmetrically arranged and given their low profile and dark frames, they are not incongruous features and do not detract from the historic or architectural interest of the building or from the character and appearance of the conservation area. The internal alterations covered by the listed building consent were considered acceptable, and these are only covered by that permission and are not part of this full planning application. With regard to the replacement gas meter, this would be moved from an internal position externally to the east of the existing position, which is acceptable subject to conditions. It is assumed that the meter would need to be enclosed in some form of housing, but no proposed details have been submitted. Therefore, to clarify and summarise as far as it relates to the planning permission appeal, listed building consent was granted for the replacement door on the north elevation, the installation of roof lights and the relocation of the gas meter. The appeal was otherwise dismissed and consent was not granted for the replacement windows or the creation of a new door in the south elevation. The Planning Service has further commented on this appeal that they agree with the reporter's findings and will seek to prioritise the replacement of the unauthorised windows with acceptable units. The enforcement team are working on this at present, and although there has yet been no response from the applicant, this is likely as a result of waiting for the outcome of this appeal. Otherwise, the applicant has made no further comments as a result of the DPEA decision, but in terms of their appeal submission, they did comment that the alterations will not have a detrimental effect on the built environment and will bring a vacant building back into use and ensure its long-term maintenance. It is agreed that there is some conflict with policy, but this is limited. The changes must be considered in the context of the street scene, where there is a range of window types and no consistency in design. They were advised by the selling agents and local residents that permission would be given. The windows were in a poor state of repair and beyond viable repair. The energy efficiency of the house is improved. It is suggested that the windows were not original. The replacement windows are high quality timber sash and case units. All other features of architectural interest have been retained and repaired, and weight should be given to policy 1 of MPF 4, which states that weight should be given to the global climate crisis.
Thank you for that. We'll go to questions. Councillor Harvey.
Just 1 second, can you pass over to Councillor?
Sure.
Thank you, convener. And yes, this is familiar to myself as I was on the LRB in August. I think this could be a question for Mr. Fogg. Home buyer survey. I suspect that that would have that this is in a conservation area.
I would expect so too. There's also normally in residential conveyances a property inquiry certificate, and again, one would expect that to have been disclosed. I think in any event, it's not in dispute by the applicant that he was aware at the time of the acquisition that he knew it was listed in and in a conservation area.
Thank you. That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Fogg. That clarifies some of my thoughts.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, apologies for not getting my question. Towards the end of your submission there, you said that the applicant suggested that the existing windows were in a poor state of repair or couldn't be repaired or something. Was that correct? Yeah.
Yes, that's what they've suggested, but there's not been any evidence submitted by them to demonstrate that, which is what you would normally expect.
Because the evidence I'm looking at in Google Maps seems to see they look okay in an okay condition to me. Just as a follow-up question as well, so the new windows, I mean, they look from the outside relatively similar, but I'm assuming from the inside they're not similar.
It depends what you describe as looking similar. Is looking similar the same, or is it slightly different? As I think I said, the units which have been installed are timber sliding sash and case units, but they will be double glazed. Their frames are thicker. They're slightly different in terms of design and detailing. They don't have the multi-pane with the astragals split, for example. So
I have no questions myself. So members, can we now proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Harvey?
I'm satisfied.
And Councillor Stewart?
Ready to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. So very quickly, obviously this case, as I mentioned, come to us before, and we deferred it on the basis that there was an ongoing appeal to the DPEA for listed building consent. That has come back now with a partial consent, as the advisors told us, and that relates to the the replacement door north elevation, the roof lights, internal alterations, and the gas meter, which obviously have no real significance, and that's quite rightly so. So I think on this occasion, I'm happy to concur with the reporter, if I'm allowed to do that. But I will go ahead and say that we refuse the rest of the alterations to the front of the property. This needs to be looked at. I'm surprised we're in this situation, bearing in mind it's a conservation area with a C-listed property. From what I've read in the paperwork originally, it seems the applicant went ahead on the basis that other houses have been changed as well, which seems to be a poor way of going forward. My suggestion is that he gets in contact with our planning officers and resolves the situation to everybody's satisfaction. So to sum up, concur with the report on what he's agreed can be done, but refuse the other parts of the application. Thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, convener. Broadly agree with you. What the Scottish reporter reported regarding the ones that are acceptable, I'm prepared to accept as well. Otherwise, though, and knowing this myself from living in a similar house, the rules are very clear, and you should know to do the application. So I'm not sure what's happened there. So I will uphold the refusal.
And Councillor Stewart.
Nothing further to add. I uphold the refusal.
Thank you. So, Mr. Fogg, we have a unanimous decision there again. Okay. Right, so that was the last item of the day. It only remains for me to thank my colleagues up here and Mr. Tierney, Mr. Fogg, and also Bailey McLaren, of course, for stepping in as she did at the early part. And there's one final thing to add, of course. This is going to be the last time that Mr. Williams appears with this esteemed company on this top table. That he's decided to leave Perth and Kinross is one thing, but to leave the noble company of the Planning and Placemaking Committee, I am beside myself with anger, to be honest. But you can disdain to walk away from us and miss the excitement of the Planning Committee. It's just unbelievable. But seriously, Danny, I know you joined us at Perth and Kinross in 2016. That was the year before I was elected, and you were on committee services throughout the last session when you were on the Planning Committee and I was vice convener, and you've obviously been off and on with us here since this new session. So all that remains for me to say, Danny, is to thank you for all your help over those last few years, the last 5 years, the 2 years, 7 years, to thank you for your help and to wish you the very best in your new venture. We are always, I'm sure you will always miss the excitement of planning and placemaking. Undoubtedly you'll miss it, but I wish you all the best, and I'm sure my colleagues will say the same. It only remains me to say, of course, that you are blessed with a name which we all know from a certain television series. So I'm going to say it now. You can book them down as far as I'm concerned and get on with it. I've wanted to say that since 1968, and now I can say it. So there we are. Book them down. But thank you, seriously, thank you for all the help you've given us. Thank you very much. Mr. Fogg, I think you want to step in.
Yeah, sorry, on the far more routine matters, can I just check in relation to Councillor Stewart, when you said you uphold the refusal, is that on the same basis as your colleagues, namely that you refuse it insofar as it was also refused by the reporter, but insofar as relevant to this application and the reporter was content to uphold, are you also upholding those parts that the LBC appeal succeeded on? And partially refusing? Yes, thank you.